Hey guys, Miss B. Hanley here. Today we're here to talk about myths and legends and the oral tradition. According to the textbook, the oral tradition, storytellers pass along stories by word of mouth, preserving shared cultural values. Which is true. Oral tradition is usually told to an audience, and they usually have certain elements. The oral tradition started a very long time ago. So a lot of stories that come from oral tradition have to do with myths and legends from ancient people. Myths and legends are ancient stories told by our ancestors to explain natural phenomena like the weather or animal behavior. And they usually explain the origins of cultural traditions and religious beliefs. Legends more often deal with a larger-than-life hero or character that can often be based on historical fact, like Paul Bunyan, or I don't want to say Achilles, Hercules? One of those Greek guys, I guess, were probably real people. You heard it here first, probably real people, it must be true. So, the whole point of Paul Bunyan, Hercules, and Achilles is that they were probably real people through oral tradition. Their stories were passed along. They could have been based on real people, but it's unsure because their stories started by word of mouth or oral tradition. So, that's kind of what the whole point of them being myths and legends is, that they could have been real people, but they're based in oral tradition, so they might be made up. The oral tradition can also take the form of folk or fairy tales. Folk tales usually have to deal with heroic acts or adventures or magic or romance, but they often focus on the relationship between the mortals and the gods. Sometimes there was a focus on animal characters who spoke to each other or represented other gods. Fairy tales are similar to folk tales, but they generally involve royal characters. Most fairy tales will include a supernatural or magic element. A lot of oral tradition is also recorded through epics. Epics are long narrative poems that use elevated language and extended comparisons of unlike subjects. These comparisons are called epic similes. These poems can often include characters and situations from other myths, legends, or folk tales. One of the things that you might hear from oral tradition are things called a universal theme. Universal themes are insights into life that recur throughout all world literature. These are the types of messages that you hear in stories that all humanity can relate to. Universal themes are usually things like the importance of heroism, the power of love, or the struggle between good and evil. Usually, these universal themes are developed through archetypes. Archetypes are characters, situations, images, or symbols that recur through all cultural narratives. Some examples of an archetypal character might be a wise and virtuous ruler whose reign brings in a time of peace and prosperity. Or the dreamer or transgressor, a character who imagines new possibilities and defies danger to bring an important gift to society. Or, even more familiar, a hero, an unpromising youth who triumphs over stronger forces through cleverness or virtue and blossoms into a wise and strong leader. So these examples that I give actually come from our textbook, but the examples that are given are actually more specific in a archetype theory known from Carl Jung. The ones that I mentioned from the textbook would be the sage archetype, the dreamer/creator archetype, and the hero archetype. So the sage archetype is the type of character who he's usually a wise old man, for example, Gandalf or Yoda from Star Wars. The dreamer/creator archetype is usually known as the creator archetype, is a character who is exploring knowledge and trying to find a specific piece of information to save the world or to help
the hero. You see this character in Tony Stark when he is creating his new technologies, Hermione in the early books when she is the most knowledgeable of the trio, and you even see this archetype in brands in the real world to express a story like Steve Jobs and the Apple Company. And the hero archetype is usually represented in the main character of a story. However, it's not always the case. The hero archetype starts off as an innocent, unwilling, sometimes hero, and overcomes a great amount of trials. And this is more talked about in another thing that I'm going to talk about later in this video, the hero's journey, and we'll get to that. But the archetypes specifically, there are a lot of different archetypes according to Carl Jung, and I can talk about that in another video as well. So if you're interested in that, look out for a video on the Carl Jung archetypes in literature and media.
An example of an archetypal pattern would be the typical struggle between a protagonist or the main character and an antagonist or the main opposition to the main character. This archetypal pattern is seen in so much movies, TV, video games, literature. All of it includes a similar pattern to one we've talked about in the past when we've looked at plot maps. Usually, a plot should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. To be more specific, it should have an exposition, a climax, and a resolution. Throughout most of this oral tradition, myths, legends, epics, and folk tales, we see a common archetypal pattern. And this archetypal pattern is known as the hero's journey. This book is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. In it, he details the archetypal pattern of the hero's journey. And I haven't finished reading all of it. So, because I haven't quite finished the book yet, I don't know enough about the other parts of it to go into a lot of depth about the hero's journey. So we're going to cover that in another video, but I can tell you that the hero's journey includes 3 main phases. These phases are known as the departure, the initiation, and the return. There's also a chapter called The Keys, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the hero's journey, but it's under that part of the book, so I imagine that it does, so I'm going to mention it anyway. A lot of scholars might say that the oral tradition only exists during a period of time where we didn't have other forms of narrative or writing, but I do think that stories are still shared through the oral tradition or word of mouth. These stories can often take the form of rumors or legends or funny anecdotes about our lives. And that's the whole point of an oral tradition, is to share with other people the human experience and share the universal themes that go along with it. So I hope this helped you understand a little bit more about oral tradition. I hope it wasn't too confusing for you. Make sure you're taking notes, and if you want to see more videos from me, make sure to subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments and I'll see if I can answer them. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in class. Bye!